This is turn 40 of Equip My Heavy Crossbow. Pythium deploys the first of his assassins and successfully kills an alchemist. So you can see here he has the basic assassin setup of a skull talisman. He also chose to invest in a handful of acorns, which gives him additional units. The rule of thumb for assassination is that you always want to bring more friends. Because this guy isn't equipped with gems, he's not able to summon friends of his own, namely an elemental, which would be able to stomp right over these smaller units. So as a result, they eventually run forward and kill him. And that's one successful assassination. Here he's able to liberate his fortress by moving his hydras away from the water. So he's running away from my water elementals here. Here in the Mountains of Mist, he is continuing to raid with a small group of sacreds, and he's able to retake this province over here. He moves his whole big old blob of hydras up onto that swamp right over there. And I'm able to retake the one that I can get to over here. Because that was just a mercenary group and I didn't bother rebidding them, they are no longer under my control, but they did their job and retook the province. And then he can't move his hydras onto either of these things. I'm still just steadily building up my mage numbers right over here until I feel like I have enough to actually beat this big old hydra blob. This mercenary company here was similarly successful, so I just set the PD to 1 so I can see what he uses to retake it. Here, his hydras are able to best my Tomb Oracle thanks to their fear auras, so they're able to break the siege on the fortress. However, he's spending a bunch of gems on doing that, and he is definitely not able to actually kill this thing. So I've gone over the script again before, I'll just go over it one more time. So basically he's casting Temper Flesh, so he's first casting Divine Blessing actually, so that's going to give him Reinvigoration, yet more regeneration, additional HP, and additional protection. That's the most important thing, and it requires no research, so, you know, definitely awesome to take advantage of that. Then he's casting Temper Flesh. So Temper Flesh gives him 50% resistance to all physical damage after protection. Well, not all physical damage, all typed physical damage. So blunt, slashing, and pierce damage is halved. That is after the protection roll, however. It also gives him a bit of additional fire resistance. He has some already from this fire brand, and then he gets 5 more from the Temper Flesh thing, and then he also has 5 from my throne. So between all that, very high fire resistance. Then he casts Iron Skin. So Iron Skin gives him vulnerability to electric damage, but it also gives him a large amount of additional protection. So this should basically make him nigh immune to all regular melee units. But if Pythium starts deploying air elementals, it's going to be one of the first buffs that I'm going to drop. Then he casts Soul Vortex. So this is the alteration spell which I had been pushing forward earlier, and it doesn't have an indicator for it, but you can see it here. At the end of the turn, or at the start of each of his turns, it's going to produce a little aura around him, which drains nearby enemy units, invigorating him so it restores some of his fatigue and gives him additional hit points. This actually can increase his HP above the max value. Finally, he's scripted to cast Iron Will. So this is going to increase his magic resistance further. Having a higher fatigue like this is actually fairly dangerous. It makes him susceptible to increased chance of critical hits, and it also gives him a penalty on attack and defense rolls. So while it's not shown here in his attack and defense stats, which are awesome, he is actually making or getting a large penalty to all of his checks. So with critical hits, even wolves are going to be able to do some damage to him. However, between his large amount of reinvigoration from the Bless here, the fact that he doesn't take additional encumbrance from combat, and the fact that he is reinvigorating further from the Soul Vortex, I feel fairly safe actually pushing his fatigue very high with his buffs, on account of the huge morale magic resistance bonus that Iron Will provides. Given that he's fighting, yeah, you can see his fatigue is actually going down significantly when he's fighting. And given that we know that Pythium is deploying a bunch of living units, in this case both from Howl and from his army of all living stuff, the Soul Vortex is going to restore his fatigue fairly quickly, and is going to quickly bring him out of threat range for critical hits. But yeah, against another army or against like hordes of skeletons and that sort of thing, I would probably not go with all of these buffs in order to preserve the fatigue, or I would stick to low fatigue buffs like the Holy Spell, which is going to cause a bit of damage reflection and so on. So yeah, he's doing pretty well so far. His morale's still up there in spite of having one Hydra nearby. Unfortunately, while he is down to very low fatigue again, it's already reset to 0, his morale is definitely suffering from all those fear auras around him, and many of his hits have been wasted on the free spawn wolves, or on the battle summoned wolves. It's worth noting that while his morale is now at -7, he has to actually get hit in order to take a morale check. So until he gets hit there, he's totally in the clear. So he's actually able to fight on for a little while, even while his morale was critically lowered from all those Hydras. In the nonce, in addition to burning all those gems from Pythium's mages, he kills 2 of the full-size Hydras and 4 of the Hydra hatchlings. And that was the group that was on this fort right over here. So now that fortress is liberated. That was just my raiding party of mercenaries. Here in the Golan Fens, he sends his whole army, takes on some PD. And then here, my Tomb Oracle takes on his large army and successfully holds them off. So I positioned my Tomb Oracle here at the bottom in order to place him on the opposite side from these guys here with their Bane Blades. So the Bane Blades deal a large amount of damage, just because these guys have a fair amount of strength. It's magic damage, which doesn't really matter because all of his buffs are just for physical stats. And they cause a decay effect. And while the Tomb Oracles are quite long-lived, if they are decaying, it is possible for him to still manage to decay out if he is in the battle for a very long time and is able to age past those 800 years. So for now, it's just the province defense fighting, and naturally they have no trouble, or naturally his actual units have no trouble taking them on. Some of his whites take a bit of damage from my heavy infantry, and once he finishes his buffs, he's basically just running straight towards the undead, so my positioning there was all for naught. On the plus side, when he does start killing things, he's going to be killing these relatively more expensive whites and ice drakes, which require gems to summon, rather than these relatively expendable limitanes or these totally expendable battlefield summoned undead. So it's worth noting that his fatigue is dropping down quite quickly, so he similarly had a very large amount of fatigue after his buff cycle. He also has an amulet of anti-magic, which is going to increase his morale even further. So this is going to help protect against Soul Slay, that sort of thing. So Pythium did actually script Dust to Dust. Unfortunately, they don't hit, and Dust to Dust also would need to deal a fair amount of damage in order to get through his very high HP pool. It's actually above his max HP from the Soul Vortex. So here you can see the Vine Shield in action. So it completely ensnared a bunch of these guys. His fatigue is back down to 0. And his script has ended, and the mages decide that they're feeling unsafe, so they summon up a bunch of skeletons. And yeah, his drakes run away. There is a fear aura on this guy as well, so that's working out pretty well. His infantry rout soon after. And while his undead are able to hold up the Tomb Oracle for a while, they're definitely not able to kill it. While he might have been able to hold until the turn timer with this big old blob of skeletons, because these guys got fatigued out in their skeleton summoning, he's actually able to clear the skeletons more quickly than they are appearing. And yeah, here with all the infantry gone, he has triggered an HP rout. And the skeletons start melting with all of the mages having routed. So he's able to hold off Pythium's attack there, and kill a fair number of these Ice Drakes and White summons, and even some of the infantry. Pythium's losses aren't particularly impressive, and I even lose a couple of blind fighters, which I had brought to help screen for the Tomb Oracle. But I'm able to hold the province. I was not able to cut off Pythium's retreats, but yeah, definitely a win for me. And then here, I am able to similarly defend from Pythium's attack, and take on a large number of Hydra hatchlings, or a large number of infantry, and a small number of Hydra hatchlings. So this is just yet another loss for Pythium. This is basically just a little raiding party he's got going. And this guy's similarly using an almost identical setup. Soul Vortex, Iron Skin, Temper Flesh. And as you can see at the start of the fight, his fatigue is quite high. But once he gets into the mix, that fatigue's all going to go away. And he has no trouble killing everything. With his quickness, he's even able to catch up to the infantry. So that was here, and yeah, he killed the entire army. My mercenary company raided successfully. My big ol' army is, which was expecting to fight his army here, is also successful in retaking that province. Because I have this group here charging on down, and these Hydras are limited by the swamp terrain, they're not going to be able to come up here in time. I expect that this I'm going to be able to take this province without any trouble with my main army. Well, not my main army, my I guess, Agarthan army. This is sort of like the normal Agarthan mid-game script. I feel very safe attacking this province with the Tomb Oracle, because even if he loses, he's going to have a safe province to retreat to. Similarly, I'm going to bounce this guy off of this army over here. This is where the bulk of Pythium's guys, actually looks like all of Pythium's guys retreated to. Yeah, because they were attacking over here. If I'd managed to take this province, they would have had their retreats cut, but I didn't really have the chance for that. In Dovin, I'm able to liberate the fortress, which had only one little Hydra holding it. And then here, I make a huge mistake. So I attacked the Fortress of Man without scouting it. And I also just did not anticipate Man having, like, any research. So I didn't bother adjusting my formation. I'm basically just relying on my flaming crossbows and sturdy front line to do its thing. And Man actually successfully set up a very good communion script. And there you go. So he has a communioned up Thunderstrike, which is the perfect answer to blind fighters. So these guys have a fair amount of HP and a huge amount of protection, but Thunderstrike, it deals armor negating damage. I, having not scouted Pythium's, or not having not scouted Man's stuff, didn't even bother scripting a lightning resistance buff. I didn't bother spacing out my units correctly against evocation. I didn't even bother setting an evo lore aside from this one crossman up here who does not have sufficient HP density in order to draw the Thunderstrikes away from my expensive sacreds. So, as you can see, each Thunderstrike is doing a huge amount of damage to my armies. My flaming crossbows do a pretty good job my flaming crossbows do a pretty good job, like, actually killing his guys in response, but they're not targeting the mages, and the mages are free to continue thunderstriking my armies, and they're hitting with the full Area of Effect 6 effect, and yeah, just doing a lot of damage. With his communion setup, he's draining the fatigue from these mages. However, because he casts Power of the Spheres, all of their things are, yeah. So all these guys have, it might just be his air random mages, I'm not sure. Might be Storm Power. No, I think these are just air random mages. Anyways, he's cleverly put his air random guys as communion slaves, so that they receive reduced fatigue. This guy, as you can see, has a higher fatigue than the other guys because his isn't halved by having a higher base path. And then these guys have plenty of fatigue left to continue spamming. So his script ends. When his mages go off script, they summon up these ghost wolves instead of being useful because the AI is like, oh no, there's no units here. We need to summon units, and yeah. So just by virtue of having this enormous blob of sacreds, I'm able to straight up face tank all of these thunder strikes and still have enough units in order to actually take the castle. There, the AI gets clever and realizes, hey, we should actually do some damage here, and it kills yet more of my expensive blind fighters. But just from the HP that his guys are taking, his mages do, or a couple of his mages seem to have routed. Yeah. I'm not sure why some of these guys I guess there's there's battlefield-wide morale checks at certain losses, like when your army loses a certain portion of its HP count, and many of his mages failed that check. And with the last of the mages routed, I'm able to take the castle. But that was a disaster. I lost 50 sacreds, 28 crossbows? More. 41 crossbows, and an archer, and a blind lord, even a couple of my Ichthyids and stuff. Yeah, so this was totally wasteful. And that was basically just a failure of positioning and scripting. I didn't bring an Earth Mage with a gem in order to cast lightning resistance. As you saw, most of the blind fighters, or most of the units that died against the thunder strikes, were not just from the direct hits, but from the larger area of effect around it, because that eventually stacks up over time, and is able to kill even high HP units. So that would have basically removed the larger component of the thunder strike's AoE, and it also would have given my blind fighters a slightly better chance of surviving the direct hits as well. Furthermore, if I had used a proper evocation bait by setting a box of blind fighters and a box of Ichthyids further forward, spread out just a little bit, and without the lightning resistance buff put on them, that would have drawn the fire. That would have prevented his Thunderstrikes from being targeted at the main group of my forces. Because Thunderstrike has a precision malice to the spell, it has a fairly high chance of missing. So when you have like a block of guys set further forward, even if they would be taking the full amount of damage from the direct hits, because there's and even though they would also be taking more damage from the smaller damage but larger AoE section around it, the higher chance of missing means that the bulk of your army, or the total amount of damage that the Thunderstrike is doing, is significantly reduced. Because when it's being launched in the middle of a force like that, even if it's 2 or 3 squares off, it's still taking out a square of your guys. So yeah, lack of proper evocation bait, lack of proper defensive buffs. I took a ton of extra losses here for no reason. So huge mistake. But I did take the Fortress of Man. So Man is now completely defeated. I own this fortress here, and I get, I guess, some air gems and nature gems. So, you know, it's worth it. Like, it was worth pushing forward here and actually conquering the fortress. It just wasn't worth doing it without looking, and it definitely wasn't worth being safe about how I actually positioned my guys. Barbarian Horde attacked and pillaged, as expected. We even had the message warning about that. I just didn't like care enough in order to actually protect against that. I'm still getting all the stuff from the gem here. I still own the throne here, so not particularly worried about that. Here, I just lose some money. And then here, I lose yet more money. And I bought some mercenaries here. So these guys are actually really cool mercenaries. I'm a big fan of them. So this is a very rare mercenary group. The primary reason that I purchased it is actually so that Pythium can't buy it, because each of these units has a flambeau. A flambeau deals triple damage against undead and demons, which means that even these regular unit Eternal Knights can basically two-shot, or even one-shot if they get lucky, a Tomb Oracle. So I need to keep these mercenaries out of Pythium's hands, even if that means suiciding them. But because I have them for 3 months, I'm also going to be actually using them. These guys are sacred, and they also have base regeneration. They're also kind of special in that they live to be 10,000. They are actually among the oldest units in the game. So yeah, these guys are from EA, or like their lore is that they are from EA, and they've basically just been mercenaries since the end of MA, when Urmor was properly defeated. So yeah, cool bit of lore to these guys. And then yeah, so they the leader here with his flambeau is able to cast Holy Pyre, so I'm going to be taking advantage of him to do some evocation. And then the rest of these mercenaries are basically going to be flanking. They have like a cool fire damage on hit, a lot of damage, great stats on these guys because they all start out with 5 experience. So even their relatively modest attack and defense scores become amazing. And then with my Bless, they're going to also be relatively resilient with high HP and reinvigoration. So I'll be able to use those guys, see what they can do. Because I expect him to move this blob of Hydras up here, I'm going to just not bother fighting them at all until I have an SC in place, because I know that I can hold this fortress, and in case he moves those Hydras up, I'm going to be sending a couple of Skeleton Horde Spammers and Fire Elemental Summoners. I'm going to be moving a couple of guys up here in order to site search, and I'm going to be moving the bulk of my force down here in order to take this throne. The reason that I'm not moving all that big army over here is basically just so that Gath doesn't get worried, because, you know, I am the leader of the game right now, so he should be a little bit scared of me. And yeah, diplomatically, things have more or less unchanged. Ulm is still fighting Archocephaly, or being conquered by Archocephaly, I should say. I lost some of my scouts in here, but I'm not hugely worried because I still kind of know the Ulm situation just by talking to the people involved with that. And then Gath is still sieging TNG, and I don't expect him to actually invade me until he properly finishes capturing it, even if it would be a good idea for him to do so. I'm continuing to make Sorcerers of the Sand over here. My site searching also goes on apace, as we saw from over here. I even found additional sites in the Devil's Pond over here, which I just hadn't had a chance to search before now. So I get the Isle of Ice, which is a great water gem site, and a couple more pearls, which is nice. And yeah. So I'm going to need to start giving gems to my mages over here in order to protect against assassination. But my D2 mages should have no trouble whatsoever. So these guys can summon a little fire elemental, but all of these guys should just be able to summon skeletons of their own and overwhelm the friends that the Pythian assassin has brought with him. Meanwhile, the Tomb Oracles are basically going to be continuing to constantly attack. So this guy's running up over here in order to support the push here into the core of Pythium's territory, because constantly having them get routed from the Hydras is it's a little bit wasteful. I can still keep bouncing him off of that because Pythium still hasn't shown me anything that's going to actually kill these Tomb Oracles. And while he does theoretically have the tech to do that, until he actually does, I'm not going to respect his ability to do that, and I'm just going to continue using these Tomb Oracles offensively and force him to actually deploy the proper response. And yeah, until he does, he's going to continue losing Sacreds and Provinces for free. And that's the turn. This is turn 31 of I equipped my heavy crossbow. So I actually sent a message to Gath asking to buy some Flesh Eaters from him. So Flesh Eater is a blood item. It's basically just an axe that gives chest wound on hit, but it also has the special ability of giving the wielder berserk. So that means that my 2 Moracles would no longer have any morale problems. Additionally, Berserk units have a different retreat time from just like the general attacker-defender thing. So what that means is that if a battle would go to turn timer, the unit is not going to retreat, given that he's berserking. So if you have an unkillable SC, you can potentially take on a province offensively that normally you would not be able to conquer at all. It's most important, however, for Golems. So Golems are mindless units, and they're also not particularly killy, because they just don't have great attack and defense stats. So even with the AoE from, say, a Flame Brand, or even 2 Flame Brands, they can potentially go to turn timer against a large enough enemy force, and then because they're mindless units, they're going to melt once they hit their turn timer. So you can potentially lose a very expensive, fully geared SC that the enemy would not be able to kill at all if you use them offensively. So the Berserker effect basically solves that problem, and as long as your Golem takes at least one little scratch so that he can get properly angry, he'll be able to continue fighting past the time that he normally would melt. So the 2 things that basically change how you can use Golems are the axes and the N9 Bless. Because Golems don't have the ability to regenerate themselves from regular regeneration or regular regeneration rings or buff magic, because they're lifeless units, the N9 Bless, given that it gives true regeneration, is the only way to actually make them heal over time. So given that I am running an N9 Bless, I'm able to basically use my Golems as SCs, when normally you can basically only use them as heavy thugs, since they just otherwise would be able to be whittled down over time even by regular troops. And then once I get the axes, I'm going to be able to use them as offensive SCs as well. So this is going to give me a huge advantage in terms of what I can actually deploy. Pythium has basically fallen back. He's at this time I actually thought that he was baiting me in because he just stopped attacking me, so he's just going to be losing a bunch of provinces here. So 2 of these guys are 2 Moracle Raiders. This was that little raiding party of Reanimator and Ethereal units. Here he actually does intercept one of my raiding parties in the waters over here, but I don't lose a whole lot. I basically just lose my Chaff and some Triton commanders, so no major loss. And then this is, of course, a bunch of Hydras. You can see here that the reason that I didn't win this fight is that I just didn't have enough water elementals. So I basically just had these guys each summon up 1. And his Hydras are slowly moving forward, given that they move so super slowly underwater. And yeah, I just don't have enough water elementals to actually punch through these guys. So even given that the tech that I've been deploying is able to deal with these Hydras reasonably well, they are still very, very tough units with that Tri-Bless. So yeah, my water elementals get chewed out, and then yeah. So I don't manage to take this province, but I don't really lose all that much in the process, just, you know, some aquatic stuff. Here, my 2 Moracle takes on these guys, and he's basically just cleaning up some of the stuff that Pythium wasn't able to take with him, so I get some nice free kills in the process. And yeah, he does attack one of my provinces over here, just retaking it with this big blob of Sacreds. I'm using some of my water-breathing gear in order to run over here, in order to take this stuff with my Alchemist and some of my Sacreds and Undead and so on. And then I'm taking over this province over here with just my Horde of Skeletons and Fire Elementals. And given that he moved the Hydras onto here, he can only move them back onto here, or up to here, or over here. He can't actually intercept this group over here. This group over here is basically just a commander being set to retreat, so I'm basically going to check and see what he uses to defend that province before I move my whole big old blob of guys with my mercenaries and such. Similarly, this guy over here is basically just going to be trying to sit onto that fortress, and this guy's going to be doing the same over here. Both of these 2 Moracles I expect to have no trouble. Given that Pythium doesn't really have anything in the area over here that can actually beat this small group over here, and given that I have this army over here, I don't expect him to hit into that at all. So I have 2 potential retreat paths for this Oracle, and then this Tomb Oracle can retreat back up to here, where my mid-game army is moving, or potentially over to here, where my Tomb Oracle is moving. In both cases, I don't expect Pythium to be able to properly kill the Tomb Oracles, so as long as they have retreat paths, they're quite safe. And then I'm just continuing to raid offensively or aggressively over here with this small raiding party, mostly because it's largely expendable. And I am finally crafting my first golem, and then hopefully I'll be receiving the Flesh Eater from Gath, and if not, I'm also forging a regular set of golem gear for it. Just, Vine Shield, Firebrand, that sort of thing. Yeah, Boots of Quickness, all basically a very similar setup to what my Tomb Oracles are using. The only major difference is that I'm giving my Golems an Iron Face. The reason for that is that unlike the Tomb Oracles, they can't cast Iron Skin and similar defensive buffs on themselves, and given that they need a Shroud in order to have my Blessing, they would ordinarily have fairly low protection if I don't give them either Boots of Stone or an Iron Face. And given that I have the spare gems to do so, I'm going for the Iron Face to get that little bit of additional protection. Meanwhile, I'm basically continuing to constantly attack. The reason that I'm having these guys hit the group where or the province where the Hydras are at the moment is that I expect him to move the Hydras away, either to hold onto this province, liberate this fortress, or just move it up over here in order to intercept my armies or start moving aggressively against me. So as long as I go towards the province where they're at now, I have a reasonable chance of beating them, and given that this is kind of just a nowhere waste province, relatively low value, I don't expect him to invest a lot in PD, and I'll be able to then take these guys and raid deeper into Pythium's territory with them. We see TNG finally fall to Gath. There's not really a whole lot to say about this. This is just AI TNG. It took Gath a fairly long time in order to actually take this fortress. He's got his giants here in a line formation at the front. Gath is investing very heavily on morale for his units, so he's giving lots of leadership boosts, or sorry, yeah, leadership and inspiration boosts to a guy who already has 120 leadership. And then he's also putting these guys here, which are standards, so they give, a morale bonus to the squad. So his guys they have incredible morale. Like, these guys basically aren't gonna rout. And then he's using these scorpion beasts, which he had been summoning for some reason, as just like frontline chaff. He's not really using mage support though, so that's not that great. Oh yeah, and then in addition to all of that good stuff, he's also casting Sermon of Courage on these guys, so they're like, they're way up there, yeah. Alright, so he gave his prophet an enchanted spear and black steel full plate, which presumably is just random gear that he had recovered or something. And, yeah. So the AI's evocation and decay spell and so on is causing a little bit of damage to Gath's troops, given that they're all like kind of blocked up in the gate here. But given that these guys are N9, Water 9, E4, like super blessed sacreds, they're not going to have a huge amount of trouble against TNG's actual troops. And this thug is insanely expensively geared. Yeah, I went over earlier how like this amount of gear is just kind of silly to put on a cheap chassis like the Malak. And yeah, you can see there that even just one lucky lightning bolt took away like half of his health. So, yeah. And it's even getting whittled down by these, where are they? These guys, the Mound Kings. They don't care at all about the awe from the angel, and they also have lances, so they can do a little bit of damage, at least on their first attack. So yeah, and you see right there, that thing died. So, an insane amount of gems spent on gear for something that just gets chopped up very easily, even by just unimpressive units and very basic evocation. But Gath had a ton more stuff, so he is able to actually win the day, lose a bunch of sacreds in the or lose a couple of sacreds in the process, and some summons, and a Moloch. But he does eventually capture TNG, and yeah, he takes them on. And I think that's it. Yeah, so I have to liberate this thing from the barbarians, so I'm just gonna send these guys over here now that I've finished my fortress. And I don't need quite all these people to defend the province. I'm just gonna send it back over here, take on the barbarians. And then here I am taking on the throne with basically the same army that captured Man. I have redundant flame arrow casting here just in order to make sure that the spell goes off. And between my sacred frontline and my many flaming crossbows, I should have no trouble taking on this province, which is mostly defended by these phantasmal warriors, which, as we'd seen earlier, are not that scary as far as special indies go. And then I'm attacking a large number of Pythium's provinces, and I can expect most of these attacks to succeed, or cost me very little if they fail. And that's the turn.